Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. It's just after 8 o'clock. Today, the 15th of June 2010. You're listening to another edition of You Classified on 93.5 Unity FM, Birmingham, heart of the city and the surrounding areas.
Right now, we want to bring in our first guest. He is an investigative researcher, a veteran investigative researcher. His name is Mr. Alexander Barron. Hello, sir.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. How are you, sir?
Very well, all things considered.
Thank you very much for joining us on this show. The theme of today's show, considering what's been happening in the news, one of the themes is the biggest ecological disaster in history, which is, of course, the Gulf oil spill, the BP oil spill. I think it's about 70,000 barrels per day are leaking into the Gulf of Mexico.
It's ludicrous. We've never seen anything like it. Somebody a while back in a Usenet forum said it wasn't as big as the another one earlier, but it's much bigger than anything we've ever seen before. And when we heard of it, when it first came about, I thought this is the end of life on Earth. It really is a wake-up call because you know the economies of the world run on oil, and we can't keep. There isn't that much left there, and this slick. We've got a slick. They said it was the size of Jamaica, which could kill every fish in the Atlantic, and this really overshadows everything else in the world today. It's not just the Louisiana coast. What if the ocean dies? It really is that big. The Atlantic Ocean is vast, but just as it's not like the Galapagos Islands, which is very fragile. But you can't abuse it like that to that extent. I had a very interesting correspondence. The guy's got a video on YouTube. Says that one way of getting rid of the surface oil is microbes, and this has been used before. There are special microbes which can actually eat the oil. There are other things as well, but I mean, this is assuming there is no leak under the seabed. And if that is the case, this is really a doomsday scenario. Somebody said the other week, when Obama says this is bigger than 9/11, he's not exaggerating. It really is enormous. We've got to stop this. We can't allow anything like this again, ever.
Well, on that note, we've now got our second guest. It's Mr. Martin Summers. You can catch Martin every Friday on BCFM, the Drive Time Show with Tony Gosling, one half of the team. Welcome, Martin.
Hello there.
Obviously, Martin, is the first time you've been on the show with Alexander Barron. Alexander Barron, could you tell us just very briefly, we introduced you very poorly, I'm very sorry, just a little bit about yourself?
I'm an independent researcher. Mostly I've dealt with issues like Zionism, disinformation about Judaism, world conspiracy. I'm very interested in the money system, of course, as we all are now, it's been exposed to what it is, the whole world balancing on a sea of debt, which is created out of nothing, or we're expected to pay interest on. I write for a music database as well, but my main field is exposing lies in the media, which are very frequent, and they come from all sorts of disparate sources.
Well, that's a short introduction. Basically, Martin, welcome back to the show as well.
Hello there.
Currently, we're talking about the Gulf of Mexico, basically, the BP oil spill.
Yeah.
It's a huge issue, basically. I'd like to mention that also in The Guardian yesterday I read that Obama's comments, and I've got a slightly different slant on this, basically. I'll put my conspiracy hat on, if you like. And what he's basically said is he's compared this to 9/11.
Yes,
what I think he means by that is because, more or less, you can paraphrase him as saying that he believes that the effects it had on economic scale, etc., are going to be very, very similar. This is the next big thing now. Obviously, what was the fallout of 9/11? Now we should expect a fallout of this oil spill as well. And it seems that really he's not talking to us, but he's talking to his minions, really. What he's saying is this is a signal that something very, very serious, and I hope not, but something very, very serious could be on the horizon.
Well, I mean, comparing it to 9/11 is all very well. I mean, but 9/11, as I'm sure Alexander is aware, there's all sorts of conspiracy theories surrounding that. This seems to be an accident. if you like, caused by lack of regulation, by the the laissez-faire attitude towards the oil industry. It's clearly a big mess. I mean, where the oil is gushing out is where the source of the Gulf Stream is. So the threat to life and to the environment is obviously very large. I'm not an expert on oil spills by any stretch of the imagination, but I think we've got to look at the economic system as a whole, which allows this kind of risky behaviour without any proper supervision, very similar to what happened with the banks. They were basically allowed to do what they wanted, and they assured us that they knew what they were doing, but patently in both cases they did not.
Martin, the whole fiasco with the Gulf of Mexico spillage could have been an act of sabotage, because if you 3-4 weeks before the disaster actually happened, Goldman Sachs actually sold between 40 and 44% of their shares.
Yes,
and a lot of people
I did see that, and obviously these kind of suspicions are out there. I mean, for example, if we're thinking back to the earthquake in Haiti some months ago, there was a rumour, ultimately sourced, we believe, with the Russian Navy, that was no accident. But I don't think when things like this happen, we should jump to conclusions about whether it's an accident or not. And what also strikes me about this is, what would be the motivation? I mean, you've suggested a motivation there, that Goldman Sachs had sold their shares and had shorted BP. I mean, in many ways, that's similar to 9/11, because we know that a consortium of new buyers of the buildings had taken out insurance against a terrorist attack and got a very handsome payout when the attack took place. But I think if we're going to be serious about conspiracy theories, and I think we should be serious about them, the world is full of conspiracies, then we mustn't be seen to be jumping to judgment about events before all the facts are clear. Although, as you pointed out, Goldman Sachs shorting BP shares is a very clear indication that something might be going on. But I think if we're going to talk about this seriously, and we must be very careful about and measured in the way that we discuss these things.
Now, Alex, you've also said that, this actually links in with a series of events, because, of course, we've got next week we come back is the, let me say that again, let me be a bit more clear. Next week will be the emergency budgets. Also, we have the situation with the flotilla in Gaza, of course, 2 weeks ago, when the IDF attacks the flotilla, killing about 9 people, at least.
More than 9, it looks like, doesn't it?
Well, I believe so, yes.
There was actually a total of 19 people missing at the beginning, and now you have 9 confirmed dead, and the other 10, well, we just haven't got any information on them, really.
Now, you feel also that these things are somehow linked, and that'd be interesting to hear what brought you to this.
Alexander would like to comment, but I mean, I think that there is a tendency to create chaos in order to profit from it. But then don't forget that chaos is part of human life anyway.
Well, with regard to Goldman Sachs selling shares, I think Max Kaiser suggested that they hadn't actually done that until afterwards, and it's all backdated. A typical banker scam. But I think the suggestion that this is sabotage is not really tenable. But the thing, why are we drilling under the ocean at all? There's a very good series of videos on YouTube by an academic, Alfred Bartlett. His thesis is the greatest peril facing mankind is our inability to understand the exponential function, in which he goes into great details about oil reserves and how much there is left. And really, we should be looking for other means now. My own position is that we should shut down all oil drilling, the whole lot. That we should create trillions of dollars out of nothing, as the banks do, and invest this in alternative energies, as we spoke this afternoon, Tarek.
Well, I totally agree with you on that one.
I mean, America's got desert, there's desert in the Middle East, there's desert in Australia, there's desert everywhere. We can cover this with solar cells, we can do it in the cities as well. We've got wave generators, we've got wind power. This is all, once you've built the apparatus, it's all virtually free energy. With regard to oil for boats and things, we must develop the alternative sources, the alternative fuels that are available now. Another thing would be to ban cars, or more or less ban most cars in cities and let everybody travel on public transport free.
Like in Holland.
Yeah, I mean, there's great scope for this, but we really cannot see another disaster.
Well, we don't depend on cars, do we? It's a modern...
Louisiana or for America. It's a tragedy ultimately for mankind. And really, stuff BP, you know, if they can't pay out their dividend, if the company goes bust, well, tough. You know, there are more important things than paying pension funds, you know.
Absolutely, and this could be the biggest environmental disaster in history.
Let me come in this side, actually. Basically, Michael Chozadowski, William Engdahl, F. William Engdahl, who is a writer of several books. One is actually a book about oil, basically. He writes a whole book about oil, which is called A Century of War and the New World Order. And he talks about how people actually got into oil in the first place, you know. But he's wrote an article here, and in that article he mentions a professor called Vladimir Kucherov. He's a professor at the Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden and the Russian State University of Oil and Gas. He has predicted that the present oil spill flooding the Gulf Coast shores of the United States could go on for years and years, many years. He also goes on to say he's a leading specialist in the theory of abiogenic deep origin of petroleum. That's a bit of a mouthful, I know. He says what BP drilled into was what we call a migration channel, a deep fault on which hydrocarbons generated in the depth of our planet migrate to the crust and are accumulated in rocks. Something like Goa in Saudi Arabia. Goa, the world's most prolific oil field, has been producing millions of barrels daily for almost 70 years with no end in sight. According to the abiotic science, Goa, like all elephant and giant oil and gas deposits all over the world, is located on a migration channel similar to that in the oil-rich Gulf of Mexico.
Can I comment on that?
Sure. Yes.
I mean, I did read that article, and it seems that there is quite a strong tendency within Russian science, in particular, to doubt the organic nature of oil. That it's some kind of mineral deposit that's not created through, ancient forests being crushed into carbon liquid. I mean, I'm not really competent to comment on either of those theories. But what I mean, my background is in economics, and you can see that there's enormous manipulation of the oil market going on all the time.
Well, I'll tell you what, Martin.
So the oil price is being bounced up and down by insider trading.
Yes,
by
exactly.
The oligopolies which dominate the market. OPEC itself is an attempt by oil-producing states to get some kind of control over their resources. And of course, BP has got a long and inglorious history in this kind of field. So they were very involved in the overthrow of the democratic government in Iran in 1953, which has led to the constant problems that country has had since that time. And if BP goes bust and disappears beneath the waves, well, perhaps that's three cheers all round, really.
Going back to Alexander, if you put these things in sort of real time, look what's happening. You've got this oil spill which could go on for years, as is mentioned here. It's causing massive havoc. It could be the biggest ecological disaster. As Alexander says, could almost destroy every fish in the sea. You've also got what's happening in Europe with the bailouts. You've also got David Cameron's government, obviously what I call the condemns, because they've condemned us, and their emergency budget coming up. You've also got impending war, basically, as well. I mean, you've got all these things tying in.
It's South Korea and North Korea.
Yes, that's another one.
And also, Turkey right now are sending more flotillas to Gaza, basically, which quite rightly as well. So, but I suspect the IDF could be just as brutal, and it's just my opinion, and it doesn't reflect Unity FM. I know that, but I'm just saying, from what we've seen historically of the IDF's policy, or foreign policy, if you like, I would not be surprised if they carried out yet another brutal attack, and this will even further deepen the enmity between Turkey and Israel, quite possibly.
Well, we're obviously on the brink of all sorts of catastrophes at various levels. We've got ecological catastrophe, economic catastrophe, and political brinkmanship going on. Trying to link all of these things together directly, I think. If people are listening who are kind of uncommitted to the ideas that we all seem to share, they sometimes think, oh, well, these people want to see a conspiracy behind everything. And it's like coming back to what I said earlier, I think there are conspiracies, but if we're going to discuss conspiracies, we've got to be very, very calm about discussing them and not sound as if we're trying to ram everything into one rag bag.
Yeah, not be a harbinger of doom, basically, and try and scare people. And what
I mean, there are serious issues to be debated here, but we've got to be very careful about how we go about it, and so that we don't sound as if we're just scaremongering, because we're not really. I mean, all of these things are true, and we need to approach it in a very sober way if we're going to have an impact in the wider community, which obviously we intend to do by having radio shows and such like.
Alexander, your take on this?
Well, I think that there's no connection between the BP spill and anything else going on in the world, but there's a big difference between saying that the governments or the Order of the Illuminati or whatever plot a conspiracy and other people jumping on the bandwagon to abuse it and to take advantage of it. You can see this in Britain, where we just had this terrible series of murders in the north of England, and there's the anti-gun lobby crying out for even further legislation. That doesn't mean that the anti-gun lobby were behind the massacre. It means that people will use tragedies to push political agendas, sometimes with the best of intentions. But the best of intentions, you know, we all know where that leads. It paves the road to hell. And one of the things that even the British government's become aware of is that it's very, if you legislate in haste, you end up regretting it. You end up making the situation worse. With regard, if we're shifting now to what's happening in the Middle East, this is an entirely different ball game. This is basically a human rights issue, and as we all know, the Israeli government doesn't believe anybody else has human rights, certainly not the Palestinians. But it's very, very interesting. I read an article that there's actually a Jewish flotilla headed towards Gaza at the moment, so I don't know if they're going to bomb that as well.
Well, they do. Well, I mean, they harm their own citizens. I mean,
well, they're mad enough, aren't they?
I mean, recently, one of the things that Israel tries to do right now, there are organizations like Gisha, and there are other also human rights organizations. There's a lot of them in Israel, basically. There's BT Salem, there's Gisha, there's other ones as well. There was a neighborhood in Palestine called Sheikh Jarrah, and the Israelis were building settlements there. And you had a lot of Palestinian and Israeli human rights activists standing together. To be honest, I think the IDF just took them as one. And also, right now there's a big clampdown happening on these organizations in Israel, a great attempt to muzzle them, basically, and to stop what they're doing.
Can I just mention in this context the Jewish Canadian activist Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine, in which she originally was researching development of torture by the CIA in the 1950s and 1960s, and then she began to realize that there's a pattern here, that when you have something like the tsunami or the earthquake in Haiti or this oil spill, there is a kind of complex developing, a kind of disaster complex at the heart of the military-industrial complex in the US, and of course with Israel interlinked into this, which then battens onto disasters and then uses them as a means to force through a pre-existing agenda. And the only thing really missing from her book, I think, is that she treats 9/11 as if it was a genuine external terrorist attack. Whereas, of course, in actual fact, in my view and the view of many others who've looked into this, they sometimes create incidents in order to create fear and confusion, so that then steps can be taken to push an agenda forward. But the main thesis of her book, and don't forget she's a Jewish activist, is that in actual fact, even when things happen by accident, they're already geared up to make use of those to push through this free market, liberalisation, crush the poor agenda. And I think that, you don't have to be... Anybody can see that if they just look at it objectively. There is definitely very powerful forces who are pushing a definite agenda, whatever happens, and they're using all of these incidents as a means of just pushing this agenda.
You mentioned that 9/11 as well, and like you say, a lot of people still believe, very, very intelligent people still believe that it was a genuine attack as well.
Yeah, me included.
And
well,
myself.
I'm not. I wouldn't be included in that. I mean, I've looked. I'm part of a group called Reinvestigate 9/11, which is based in Britain, but we cooperate with activists in the United States and elsewhere. And it's pretty clear, actually, to most people. I mean, General Ivashov, who was commander of the Russian armed forces on September the 11th, people can just look him up on the internet. Ivashov, E-I-V-A-S-H-O-V. He was Chief of Staff, Russian armed forces on 9/11. He's saying, as far as we're concerned, that was an inside job.
Well,
and I would say that the Russian armed forces chief would be in a position to know.
Well,
I think that this is the problem, we're on the cusp of World War III here. It's Saborsky, who is the head of the US Army War College. He says that it's well known at the highest levels in the US military that Mossad were behind 9/11. So if we're looking for a linkage with all of these things, it's Israel's drive to war and using all of these incidents as a means to try and get to that end. But of course, this isn't directly related to oil spills.
Well, I'll have to take issue with that. I mean, I never like to tell lies or fantasize about the Zionists because the truth is grotesque enough. And if you stick with the bland truth, that in the case of the flotilla, we had an act of piracy on the high seas and the indiscriminate mass murder of innocent unarmed civilians, that is bad enough. It's a war crime.
Well, I'm not saying that's not bad enough, but I think that the former head of the US Army War College is actually a Jew. Saborsky, I think it's spelt Saborsky, but I can't remember. I haven't got it written down for at the moment. But generally, General Ivashov, I-V-A-S-H-O-V, Commander-in-Chief Russian Armed Forces, retired. He says it was an inside job. That's good enough for me. Well, we're on the edge of World War III. The Russians are making their deployments on the world at the moment on the assumption that was an inside job, just as probably the bombings in Moscow in 1999 were an inside job by the FSB.
We're just coming to a break here. This is a U classified 93.5, Heart of the City. Please stay tuned for after the adverts. Welcome back, Martin and Alexander. Thank you for waiting so patiently there. Also got a little competition going there. We're just announcing competition. Just before the break, we were talking about two particular issues. One was the Gulf oil spill. We kind of touched on a few things, really, basically. We talked about, obviously, Israeli policies in the Middle East and things like that. I'd like to welcome you both back, and just to continue what we were saying, really. Sort of carry on from where we left off before the ads came in.
It seems that Alexander and myself do not share a view about 9/11, but that's fine, and because that's the nature of debates, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes.
I think that I think we both agree that the oil spill is unlikely to be a conspiracy. But I think that the background to the oil spill is not really a conspiracy. It's just a power structure where people get away with things that they shouldn't be allowed to get away with. They're not properly regulated. They're not properly supervised. They're pursuing private profit at public expense, and nobody seems to be able to do anything about it. And it's a kind of, it's a fingerprint of our society, this whole attitude that private profit overrules everything. And that's a root of a lot of the problems that we face.
Now, Martin, there's something else which Said asked me to talk to you about, because obviously he's quite concerned about it. That's the budget that's coming up on the 22nd. I mean, really, of course, Martin, yourself, you're an economist, and I think it's going to be a bit harsh, and we don't want to upset people, but obviously it's necessary.
Well, it's not necessary. I think that's the problem. I mean, everybody's saying that we've got to cut public expenditure, not just in this country, but in the whole of the G20. Mm-hmm. But effectively what's happening here is we're being blackmailed by the people we've just bailed out. So 2 years ago, we bailed out the banks and the stock market, and now they're turning around and saying, you bailed us out, thank you very much, now we want you to do that X, Y, and Z for us.
Yes.
And this is a fundamental problem of political power. We've got a financial oligarchy which is out of control, and the people running the oil industry are also out of control, and that's why we've got the problem in the Gulf.
Yes, well, when I say harsh...
We've got to cut public expenditure is just wrong. It's going to crash the economy. It's just silliness, really.
When I say harsh, what I mean is obviously... What I want to get into basically is you're totally right in what you're saying. I agree with you totally. The harshness is really upon the listeners who are going to hear this, basically. And I want you. What do you know about what we should expect after this emergency budget? What's going to happen to people's lifestyles?
What will begin to happen is that we've already got a problem where the economy basically is not firing on all cylinders. So what they're going to do by doing this is they're basically putting the brake on, and the economy will start to deteriorate further. And the bizarre thing about this is that as the economy deteriorates further, as it did in the 1930s and in the 1980s, is that the budget deficit that they're trying to bring down will actually go up. because people won't be in work anymore, they won't be paying taxes, they won't be buying things, so there won't be VAT coming in, and at the same time there'll be more people on the dole, so they'll be paying more money out.
Well,
so in actual fact, this is not even going to get the deficit down, but the whole problem is that people shouldn't think of the deficit as independent from the crisis as a whole. And the crisis is a financial crisis rooted in the financial system. It's not the fault of dinner ladies and street sweepers that the thing has gone down the tube. They are not to blame, are they?
Well, you say about the economy, Martin, that's just going to deteriorate even further. There was a little piece, I think it was yesterday, on one of the news websites that they're forecasting the economy to actually grow to 2.5% instead of the 3.5% that they predicted for next year.
Well, this is this new body that they just set up, the Office of Budget Responsibility. But don't forget that this is a new body set up by the new government to tell them what they want to hear. I mean, I'm not a conventional economist. I know many conventional economists believe that somehow the capitalist system is going to sort of